Travis the Chimp was born on October 21st, 1995 at the Missouri Chimpanzee Sanctuary, originally known as Chimparty, located in Festus, Missouri. His parents, Susie and Coco, were wild-caught chimpanzees imported from Africa in the 1970s. Susie, his mother, had previously lived in a zoo before being relocated to the sanctuary, where she was ultimately killed in 2001 after escaping and posing a threat to local residents. Travis's life took a dramatic turn just 3 days after his birth, when he was separated from his mother, a common practice in the exotic animal trade to encourage bonding with human caretakers. He was then sold to Sandra and Jerome Harold, a couple from Stamford, Connecticut, for $50,000 in cash. The Harolds, who owned a successful towing company, named him Travis after country singer Travis Tritt. Upon arriving at the Harolds' home in the affluent North Stamford neighborhood, Travis was integrated into the family's daily life in every conceivable way. He wore custom-made clothing, sat at the dining table for meals, and was even taught to use utensils. Sandra and Jerome treated him as a surrogate child, especially after the tragic loss of their only daughter, Suzanne, in a car accident in 2000. This devastating event deepened Sandra's emotional dependence on Travis, whom she described as her lifeline. After Jerome's death from cancer in 2004, Sandra's bond with Travis intensified further. She began sharing her bed and even her bath with him, later remarking that only those who had eaten and bathed with a chimpanzee could truly understand the experience. Travis's upbringing blurred the lines between human and animal. He learned to brush his teeth with a water pick, drink wine from stemmed glasses, and operate household appliances such as television remotes and computers. He often accompanied the Harolds to their business, where he would ride in the passenger seat of the tow truck, buckled in with a seatbelt, and pose for photos with customers. Travis also developed a taste for gourmet food, enjoying lobster tails, filet mignon, and nightly desserts like ice cream and chocolates. His sedentary lifestyle and indulgent diet eventually led to significant obesity, with his weight reaching 240 pounds by 2009, almost double the average for a male chimpanzee. Travis's remarkable adaptation to human routines made him a local celebrity. He appeared in national commercials for Old Navy and Coca-Cola and was featured on television programs, although some reports dispute whether he was the only chimpanzee used in these productions. In Stamford, Travis was known for his ability to interact with the community. He greeted police officers, flagged down ice cream trucks for treats, and even drove the family's Corvette on occasion. Neighbors often described him as gentle and obedient, with some noting that he listened better than their own children. Despite his domesticated behavior, there were early signs of trouble. In 1996, when Travis was just a year old, he bit a woman's hand, though the Harolds dismissed it as playful behavior. As he matured, the risks associated with keeping him became more pronounced. After Jerome's death, Sandra became increasingly reclusive, and Travis was kept indoors more frequently, deprived of outdoor stimulation and social interaction with other chimpanzees. He spent much of his time watching television and eating snacks, which not only contributed to his physical decline, but also likely affected his psychological well-being. Then in October 2003, a far more serious episode occurred when Travis was 8 years old. While Sandra was driving him through Stamford, a pedestrian threw an empty soda bottle at their car, which entered through a partially open window and struck Travis. Startled and agitated, Travis unbuckled his seatbelt, let himself out of the vehicle, and began chasing the pedestrian. He then rolled around in the road, jumped on cars, and held up traffic at a busy intersection. The chaos lasted for nearly 2 hours, with Travis evading police and animal control officers who tried to lure him back into the car. He repeatedly let himself out of the vehicle and, on several occasions, chased officers around the car. Witnesses described the scene as both alarming and surreal as the chimpanzee darted between vehicles and interacted with bystanders. This incident was obviously a major red flag. Animal control officers and primatologists who reviewed the case warned Sandra and local authorities that Travis, now a mature adult chimpanzee, possessed the strength of several adult men and was inherently unpredictable. Experts cautioned that keeping such an animal in a domestic setting was extremely dangerous, and urged the Heralds to consider relocating Travis to a sanctuary where his needs could be better met and the public would be protected. Despite these warnings, no formal action was taken. Instead, the Heralds responded by limiting Travis's public outings, keeping him confined to their home. This change in routine deprived Travis of stimulation and exercise, further exacerbating his behavioral and health issues. He became increasingly sedentary, spending his days watching television, eating junk food, and playing on the computer, which contributed to his growing obesity and likely increased his psychological stress. In the years following the 2003 escape, there were other, less publicized incidents that suggested Travis's behavior was becoming more problematic. According to some reports, Travis escaped from his cage and had to be tranquilized by authorities just 6 months before the major incident that we are about to discuss that occurred in 2009. Legal documents obtained by the Hartford Courant revealed that this incident would become a key point in Charla Nash's lawsuit against the state, as evidence that officials had ignored mounting warning signs. There were also unconfirmed reports of a 1998 biting incident, but most sources agree that the 1996 and 2003 episodes were the most significant prior to 2009. The cumulative effect of these incidents painted a picture of an animal whose needs and instincts were fundamentally incompatible with life in a human home. Primatologists and animal behavior experts were unequivocal in their assessments. Frans de Waal, a renowned primatologist, compared keeping a mature male chimpanzee as a pet to keeping a tiger. He noted that chimps raised as pets often consider themselves part human, but their strength and aggression, especially as they reach maturity, make them time bombs in domestic settings. Frans and others pointed out that no matter how well-trained or acclimated a chimpanzee might seem, the animal's wild instincts can surface without warning, especially under stress or in unfamiliar situations. Fast forward to February 16, 2009, Travis, then 14 years old, unleashed a violent assault on Charla Nash, a close family friend and former employee of the Heralds' towing company. The incident not only devastated those involved, but also ignited a national debate about the dangers of keeping wild animals as pets. The day began with Travis exhibiting signs of agitation. He had taken Sandra's car keys and left the house, a behavior that was unusual but not entirely unprecedented for the highly intelligent chimp. Travis, who was familiar with operating household items and had a history of mimicking human routines, seemed restless and uncooperative. Sandra, unable to coax him back inside, called Charla Nash for help. Nash, who was 55 years old at the time, had known Travis for years and had worked closely with the Herald family. She arrived at the house bringing with her a Tickle Me Elmo doll, one of Travis's favorite toys, hoping it would entice him to return indoors. However, several factors may have contributed to what happened next. Nash had recently changed her hairstyle and was driving a different car. These seemingly minor details may have confused or alarmed Travis, who, despite his familiarity with Nash, was already in a heightened state of agitation. Compounding this, Sandra had earlier given Travis tea laced with Xanax, a prescription anti-anxiety medication intended for humans, in an attempt to calm him. Travis was also being treated for Lyme disease at the time, and the effects of these medications on a chimpanzee's behavior are not fully understood. As Nash approached with the Elmo doll, Travis's behavior turned instantly violent. Without warning, he lunged at Nash and began a savage assault. The attack was extraordinarily brutal and sustained, lasting approximately 12 minutes, a span that must have felt like an eternity for those involved. Travis used his immense strength to overpower Nash, biting and tearing at her face, scalp, and hands with devastating force. He tore away her nose, lips, eyelids, and hands and inflicted multiple fractures to the bones of her facial structure. Nash was left blind, and her injuries were so severe that first responders could not immediately identify her gender. Sandra, witnessing the attack, desperately tried to intervene. She first attempted to subdue Travis by striking him on the head with a shovel. When this failed to stop the assault, she resorted to stabbing Travis in the back with a butcher knife. Despite her efforts, Travis's assault continued until Nash was left motionless on the ground. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Sandra locked herself in her car and called police. The call, which would later be released to the public, captured the raw panic and horror of the moment. Sandra's frantic pleas for help included the now infamous lines, "He's eating her, shoot him," and "Bring the guns, you have to kill this chimp." Her terror was palpable, and Travis's screams could be heard in the background as she begged dispatchers to send armed officers. Emergency medical services arrived on the scene but waited for police backup before approaching the house, given the obvious danger posed by the rampaging chimp. When police arrived, Travis, now covered in blood and still agitated, approached a patrol car. He attempted to open a locked passenger door and, in the process, smashed a side view mirror. Officer Frank Chiafari, who had known Travis from previous friendly encounters in the community, was confronted with a dire situation. As Travis circled the cruiser and managed to open the driver's side door, Officer Frank fired 4 shots with his service pistol, striking Travis. Despite being shot, Travis did not immediately collapse. Instead, he screamed and retreated into the house, leaving a trail of blood as he moved through the kitchen and bedroom before finally collapsing and dying in his own room next to his cage, a space that had once been his sanctuary. With Travis neutralized, first responders rushed to Nash's side. The scene was described by paramedics and police as one of the most gruesome they had ever encountered. Nash's face was unrecognizable, and her hands were either completely severed or left as mangled stumps. Nash, despite her horrific wounds, was still conscious and attempted to reach out for help with what remained of her arms. She was rushed to Stanford Hospital, where a team of surgeons worked for more than 7 hours to stabilize her and address her catastrophic injuries. Within 72 hours, Nash had undergone multiple surgeries to repair her face and hands, but doctors soon determined that she would be permanently blind due to infections in both eyes. Her injuries included the loss of her eyelids, nose, lips, and mid-face bone structure, as well as 9 fingers. Surgeons removed Travis's hair and teeth that had become embedded in her bones and attempted to reattach her jaw. After initial treatment at the hospital, Nash was transferred to the Cleveland Clinic for further care and rehabilitation. Her family established a trust fund to help cover her immense medical expenses and support her daughter. Nash's injuries made her a candidate for an experimental face transplant, which she would later undergo in Boston. The attack and its aftermath drew national and international attention, with Nash eventually revealing her face to the public for the first time on the Oprah Winfrey Show in November 2009. Meanwhile, Travis's body was transported to the University of Connecticut for a necropsy, as required by state law, to test for rabies and other potential diseases. His head and torso were separated for examination, and the results confirmed that Travis was not rabid at the time of the attack. Nash's family filed a $50 million lawsuit against Sandra, alleging negligence for keeping Travis despite previous warnings and incidents. Nash also sued the state of Connecticut for $150 million, arguing that state officials failed to act on known dangers. Sandra's defense maintained that the attack was unforeseeable, but animal behavior experts and advocates pointed to Travis's history and the inherent risks of keeping primates as pets. After the attack, Sandra experienced profound legal and emotional turmoil. She was not charged criminally for the incident, but the lawsuit led to her assets being frozen during the legal proceedings. The attack, combined with the earlier deaths of her only child and her husband, left her deeply depressed and increasingly reclusive. In the years following the tragedy, Sandra rarely left her home, became more withdrawn, and reportedly struggled with hoarding. She placed a stuffed chimpanzee in Travis's room for comfort, and at one point acquired another chimp named Chance, though she could not keep him at her home and instead visited him out of state. Sandra's mental and emotional health continued to decline under the weight of these losses and the ongoing lawsuit. She eventually began to venture out more, reconnecting with friends and even dating, but those close to her noted that she remained fixated on Travis and the events that had transpired. On May 24th, 2010, just 15 months after the attack, Sandra died suddenly at her Stamford home from a ruptured aortic aneurysm at the age of 72. Her attorney stated that the accumulation of heartbreaks, her child's death, her husband's passing, the loss of Travis, and the maiming of her friend Charla Nash had left her emotionally devastated and, quote, "In the end, her heart, which had been broken so many times before, could take no more." Franklin Delano Floyd was born on June 17, 1943 in Barnesville, Georgia, the youngest of 5 children to Thomas and Della Floyd. His father, a cotton mill worker and alcoholic, died from kidney and liver failure in 1944 when Floyd was just 1 year old. Left a widow at 28, Della struggled financially and moved her children into her parents' small apartment. By 1946, the grandparents could no longer manage the burden and the family was forced to leave. Floyd and his siblings were placed in the Georgia Baptist Children's Home in Hapeville, a decision orchestrated by Lamar County Child Welfare Authorities. The institution, intended to provide stability, instead became a site of relentless trauma. Floyd was bullied for his perceived feminine demeanor and subjected to repeated sexual assaults by older boys. Staff members compounded the abuse. As a teenager, Floyd's hand was plunged into scalding water as punishment for masturbating. These experiences fostered deep-seated resentment and a fractured sense of identity. In 1959, after his youngest sister left the orphanage, 16-year-old Floyd ran away, breaking into a nearby home to steal food. The orphanage contacted his sister Dorothy, who lived in North Carolina, offering to avoid criminal charges if she took custody. Dorothy agreed, but later expelled him for undisclosed behavioral issues. Homeless, Floyd traveled to Indianapolis to find his mother, only to discover she had become a Della assisted him in forging documents to enlist in the U.S. Army by falsifying his age, but he was discharged 6 months later when the deception was uncovered. Floyd's first documented crime occurred in February 1960 when he broke into a Sears department store in Inglewood, California to steal a gun. Police responded to an alarm, leading to a shootout where Floyd was shot in the stomach but survived after emergency surgery. Sentenced to a youth institution for a year, he violated parole in 1961 by traveling to Canada. By June 1962, Floyd's crimes escalated violently. After securing a job at Atlanta International Airport, he abducted a 4-year-old girl from a bowling alley and sexually assaulted her in nearby woods. Convicted of kidnapping and child molestation, he received a 10 to 20-year sentence at Georgia State Prison. In November 1962, he was transferred to Milledgeville State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation, where Dr. James B. Craig diagnosed him with chronic undifferentiated schizophrenia, noting a possible compulsion for punishment, but stopping short of declaring him legally incompetent. In March 1963, while escorted to an eye doctor, Floyd escaped custody, stole a car, and drove to Macon, Georgia. There, he robbed the Citizens and Southern National Bank of about $7,000 using a pellet gun. Arrested the same day, he confessed to the FBI and was sentenced to federal prison, first in Chillicothe, Ohio, then Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, where he endured repeated inmate rapes. During this period, he attempted suicide by threatening to jump from a prison roof. Paroled in November 1972, Floyd was sent to a halfway house but fled within a week. On January 27, 1973, he approached a woman at a Georgia gas station, forced her into her car, and attempted to rape her before she escaped. Arrested and released on bond posted by a former inmate, David Dial, Floyd skipped his June 1973 court date, becoming a fugitive. While on the run, Floyd assumed the alias Brandon Williams and married Sandra Brandenburg in 1974. In 1975, Sandra was sentenced to 30 days in jail for passing bad checks in Dallas, Texas. Floyd, who had married Sandra under his Brandon alias, used her incarceration to kidnap her 4 children. Suzanne, aged around 5, her sisters Allison, age 4, and Amy, age 3, and infant brother Philip. When Sandra was released, she discovered her home empty. Authorities took no immediate action as Floyd was considered the children's legal guardian due to his marriage to Sandra. Sandra eventually found Allison and Amy at a church-run foster home in Oklahoma City, but both Suzanne and Philip had vanished. For decades, Sandra was led to believe that Philip had died in a car accident, a lie perpetuated by Floyd. After the abduction, Floyd erased Suzanne's identity, renaming her Sharon Marshall and fabricating a new birth certificate and social security number. He enrolled her in Hillcrest Elementary School in Oklahoma City, where her teachers quickly recognized her as an academically gifted child. Throughout her schooling, Suzanne, now Sharon, excelled, eventually becoming valedictorian at Capitol Hill High School. Her 1986 valedictorian speech, which focused on perseverance, masked the reality of her life under Floyd's manipulative and abusive control. By 1986, Suzanne's circumstances became even more dire. After earning a scholarship to study aeronautical engineering at Georgia Tech, she discovered she was pregnant. Floyd, who had already begun sexually abusing her, forced her to abandon her academic aspirations. He relocated them to Tampa, Florida, and coerced Suzanne into working as a dancer under the alias Tanya Tadlock at the Mons Venus strip club. In 1988, Suzanne gave birth to Michael Anthony Hughes. Floyd falsely claimed to be Michael's father, but DNA tests later confirmed the biological father was a college student Suzanne had briefly dated. In an effort to further cement his control, Floyd married Suzanne in 1989 under the alias Clarence Hughes, using forged documents to list her as 19 years old when she was 20, and himself as 34 when he was actually 46. The family's life in Oklahoma City in 1990 was marked by continued instability and fear. Suzanne continued dancing at the Vegas club to support herself and her son Michael. On April 30th, 1990, she was discovered unconscious near Interstate 240, with groceries scattered nearby. She was hospitalized with severe head injuries and died 5 days later. Although the official cause of death was blunt force trauma, which was inconsistent with a typical hit and run, police initially classified the incident as an accident. Floyd, who claimed to have been asleep at their motel at the time, quickly became a suspect as inconsistencies in his story emerged. Suzanne's autopsy revealed injuries indicative of assault, and a witness later testified that Floyd had threatened her days before her death, warning, "If I can't have you, no one will." Floyd swiftly collected her life insurance payout and fled with Michael, evading police questioning. For 24 years, Suzanne's true identity remained a mystery. In 2014, the FBI Cold Case Unit, working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, re-examined the case. The breakthrough came when DNA samples from Suzanne's biological father, Clifford Savakis, confirmed her identity. During prison interviews, Floyd admitted to kidnapping Suzanne in 1975 and revealed her birth name, though he falsely claimed that Sandra had willingly surrendered her. Suzanne's siblings, including Philip, were finally able to learn the truth about her fate. On another note, Philip was only able to reunite with Sandra in 2020 after DNA testing. If you recall, earlier I mentioned that Floyd lied about Philip dying in an accident. Turned out that he was alive the entire time under the name Philip Todd. Another crime that Floyd is tied to is the murder of Cheryl Ann Comesso. Both Suzanne and Cheryl worked as dancers at the same club. Floyd, who maintained a domineering and violent presence in Suzanne's life, also interacted frequently with Cheryl and her co-workers. Tensions between Floyd and Cheryl escalated after Floyd accused her of reporting Suzanne for misstating her income, which resulted in Suzanne losing government benefits for her son, Michael. This accusation led to a heated argument outside the club, witnessed by co-workers, during which Floyd physically assaulted Cheryl by punching her in the face. In early April 1989, 19-year-old Cheryl left her family's home with a packed bag, telling her brother she would return the following week. She was never seen alive by her family again. On May 15, 1989, her car was discovered abandoned at the St. Petersburg airport, where it had been parked since April 7th. The search for Cheryl went cold, and her fate remained unknown for years. It was not until April 1995 that her skeletal remains were discovered by a landscaper in a marshy area off Interstate 275 in Pinellas County, Florida. The remains were not identified as Cheryl's until the following year. An archaeologist determined that she had died from a combination of blunt force trauma and 2 gunshot wounds to the head, specifically execution-style shots to the back of the skull. The right cheekbone of her skull was fractured shortly before death, consistent with injuries visible in later discovered photographs. That same year, a mechanic in Kansas found a large envelope stuffed between the bed and gas tank of a vehicle he had recently purchased at auction. The car had been stolen by Floyd in Oklahoma in September 1994 and later abandoned in Texas. Inside the envelope were 97 small, irregularly cropped photographs, many of which depicted a woman bound, blindfolded, beaten, and bleeding, some in sexually explicit poses. Among the images were close-up shots of the woman's injuries, and several photos showed her wearing a distinctive bikini similar to one found with Cheryl's remains. Furthermore, amongst these photographs were also ones that depicted the sexual abuse of Suzanne very early in her childhood. At trial, Cheryl's father, brother, friends, and an acquaintance positively identified her in the photographs. An FBI analyst compared the clothing, jewelry, and a bejeweled artificial fingernail in the images to items found with Cheryl's remains and found no inconsistencies. One of the photos even contained the thumb of another person. Forensic experts compared it to Floyd's thumb and found 9 common characteristics, concluding that Floyd could not be excluded as the person holding the camera or restraining Cheryl. Additional evidence tied the scene in the photographs to Floyd's trailer, which had been intentionally burned down shortly after Cheryl's disappearance. A former neighbor who had babysat Michael identified the sofa and other furniture in the photos as belonging to Floyd and noted that these items were destroyed in the fire. She also recognized the trailer's window and door as well as a boat that appeared in the background, further linking Floyd to the crime scene. As for Suzanne's son, Michael, he was thrust into the foster care system following his mother's suspicious death in 1990. Under the care of foster parents Ernest and Deloy Merck in Oklahoma, Michael began to overcome early developmental delays and was described as a resilient and loving child. The Mercks, who had grown deeply attached to him, initiated adoption proceedings. This process prompted a court-ordered DNA test, which conclusively proved that Floyd was not Michael's biological father. As a result, in August 1994, a judge denied Floyd's request for custody, a decision that would have devastating consequences. Floyd, who had recently been released from prison for parole violations, was determined to reclaim Michael, seeing the boy as his last tangible connection to Suzanne. On September 12, 1994, Floyd arrived at Indian Meridian Elementary School in Choctaw, Oklahoma, carrying a .38 caliber revolver. He confronted Principal James Davis, threatening him at gunpoint and demanding to be taken to Michael's first-grade classroom. Witnesses later recalled Floyd's unnerving calmness and the deadly seriousness of his threats. Once in the classroom, Floyd seized Michael and forced both the boy and Principal Davis out to the parking lot, where he commandeered Davis's pickup truck. Floyd drove the pair to a secluded wooded area in Hughes County. There, he handcuffed Principal Davis to a tree, warning him not to attempt escape or call for help. Floyd then vanished with Michael, leaving Davis stranded until a passing motorist discovered him hours later. The abduction triggered a massive nationwide manhunt. Floyd managed to evade authorities for weeks, moving across state lines, changing vehicles, and relying on a web of aliases. His run ended on November 30th, 1994, when he was apprehended in Louisville, Kentucky, after a landlord grew suspicious of his behavior. When police arrested him, they found a stolen car, several false identification documents, and the revolver used in the kidnapping. Michael, heartbreakingly, was not with him. Interrogators pressed Floyd for Michael's whereabouts, but he offered only evasive and contradictory stories. At times, he claimed Michael was safe with a family in Kansas City. At others, he suggested the boy was living abroad or with a government attorney. Floyd also made chilling offhand confessions to acquaintances, at one point saying he had drowned Michael in a motel bathtub, and at another that he had buried the boy in an unmarked grave. For years, these conflicting accounts stymied investigators and left Michael's foster family in agonizing uncertainty. A breakthrough came in 2013 when FBI Special Agent Scott Lobb re-examined the case and interviewed Floyd, who was then on death row for the murder of Cheryl Camesso. After hours of questioning, Floyd finally admitted to killing Michael on the day of the abduction. He claimed that after fleeing with Michael, he became enraged by the boy's behavior and, somewhere near the Oklahoma-Texas border, pulled off the highway and shot Michael twice. Floyd said he buried Michael's body in a shallow grave at an unspecified location. In 2015, the FBI, assisted by University of Oklahoma anthropologists, conducted an extensive search of the area Floyd described, using ground-penetrating radar and carefully sifting through the soil. Despite these efforts, they found no trace of Michael's remains, which leads some to believe that Floyd was yet again just playing with investigators. In 1995, Floyd was convicted of kidnapping, carjacking, and assault with a dangerous weapon for the abduction of Michael Hughes. Although a life sentence was initially imposed, it was later overturned on appeal, but Floyd remained imprisoned on state charges. His 2002 trial for the murder of Cheryl Camesso was notable for his refusal to undergo mental health evaluations. Instead, Floyd testified about his abusive childhood, but the court ultimately upheld the death sentence in 2005, citing aggravating factors such as his prior violent felonies and the particularly heinous nature of the crime. Floyd's appeals focused on procedural errors and questions about his mental competency, but these arguments were consistently rejected by the courts. Ultimately, Franklin Delano Floyd died on death row in 2023, closing one chapter in a case that remains partially unsolved. The full truth behind the fate of Michael Hughes and the details of Suzanne's life and death may never be known. While much has been uncovered about the abuse, forced identity changes, and sexual exploitation she endured, there are gaps in the timeline, particularly regarding her pregnancies and children. It is stated that Suzanne had at least 3 children, the first being Michael, the second was Megan Dufresne, who was placed for adoption, and a third child whose identity and fate remain unknown. The details of this third child, including whether the child survived and where they might be now, are still unclear, despite Floyd's brief admissions and ongoing efforts by investigators and family members to piece together the truth. Additionally, the years Suzanne spent living under various aliases, moving from state to state, and the specifics of her relationships and daily life during that time are not fully documented. Much of what is known comes from witness accounts, recovered photographs, and Floyd's own statements, which are often unreliable or self-serving. The full psychological and emotional impact of her ordeal, as well as the precise nature of her interactions with others while under Floyd's control, remain partially shrouded.